So hello guys and girls, thank you for joining me. I really appreciate your company. Look, Nikon have blessed us with a lot of new releases and things to talk about at the moment, so I think it's a great idea we do just that. So I've had some experiences where I've done some recent video with some Nikon equipment. I've also done some photos, and I'd like to talk to you just generally about camera gear and accessories and these new releases that have come out that are very exciting. Now, one of the new releases that I would like to talk about straight up is the new 600mm. It's a 600mm 6.3 f-stop, and I think it's very good because what it is, it's something that's very high quality. It's an S-line lens. It's beautifully constructed, high quality glass, and of course, we were really missing something that was specifically a prime that was a little bit more affordable. Now, of course, we had the TC 600 TC. And that one with the teleconverter would also go to 840mm, and that was a brilliant unit, but we're talking $25,000 Australian. That was like ludicrously expensive. Only for very elite pro photographers would be able to throw money at something like that and actually have any hope of return. So even though it was a high quality product and a brilliant concept, it was very, very expensive. And of course, this 600mm, and it's around, let's say, a third of the price of that, it's far more affordable. At around, I think it's about $8,000 Australian. I'll put a post up on the screen so you'll see exactly what it's worth. But at around 4.7 thousand American, or about $7,000 or $8,000 Australian, it's a lot more affordable for those who are serious about having a quality prime at 600mm for their wildlife and sports action. The net positives, I should say, let's talk about the positives of the lens. It is the quality build. So this is a proper S-line lens. It's very much sort of similar theme, I suppose, to the 400 prime, the 400 4.5. So in that way, it's sort of a very high quality unit and you can be confident with using it. And then of course, at the other end of the spectrum, there's the 800mm 6.3. Now, what I would like to discuss about this is really, I feel that they've sort of missed the ball a little bit here. They dropped the ball, because if you look at the numbers just there, you've got a 400 at 4.5, you've got an 800 at 6.3, the 600 therefore logically as a high quality unit, comparing with those other lenses, really should have been about a 5.6. So to make it a 6.3 isn't tragic. I mean, the difference between 5.6 and 6.3 is pretty marginal, pretty small. However, there is a difference, and it falls very close to the 6.3 of the 800 rather than the 4.5 of the 400. Having it exactly in between at 5.6 would have made it a dream lens and, of course, a perfect fit into their collection. This sort of really doesn't fit. It's sort of like an odd build in that way, being a 6.3, and that's particularly when you consider their long zoom. So they have a very high-end long zoom, the 180mm to 600mm. And at 600mm, that's a 6.3 as well. And it's about a third of the cost of that 600 prime. So it sort of gets a little bit odd, doesn't it? A bit uncomfortable when you think you can spend just a couple of $1,000s and get a 600mm at 6.3, or you spend 3 times the money, you still end up with a 600 at 6.3. Well, what's the point? What's the purpose then of spending all that extra money on this prime? Well, there is some advantages to it, and we'll discuss that. One, of course, is being a specific build, it's going to be razor sharp and very fast focusing at that 600mm. So if the speed of autofocus and the quality and sharpness of the image is everything to you, then you can justify spending the extra money. The other bonus that you get with this lens, and it's a really big bonus, this is not to be underestimated here, is the fact that you're getting it very lightweight. So it's dramatically lighter than that 180 to 600, and certainly half the weight of the 600 TC. So if weight is the big factor, if you're holding a camera all day, you're trekking through the woods or wilderness, you're looking for that perfect bird shot or animal shot, and you might be spending 8 hours carrying the camera around your neck, well, you're going to want something nice and light to carry in your hands when you're taking those shots, because you'll get tired very quickly. It's different when you're on a tripod. If you're doing like a sports stadium shot, maybe you've got a monopod or a tripod, it's obviously that's taking all the weight and it's not so bad, and you may not be moving around terribly much, maybe just slightly to the left or slightly to the right. So the lightweight factor is a big deal, and I'm very much encouraging people that are trekking all day with a camera setup that's going to be a real bargain for them. Now, for example, I have here the Z9. The Z9 on its own weighs a small, it's like 2 house bricks. It's very heavy. So if you put a heavy zoom lens on this and try and carry it around all day, yeah, that's going to near kill you. But if you're a little bit more on the practical of weight side, and maybe you've got something like a Z7 or perhaps even the Z8. Now, the Z8 is a lot lighter than the Z9. It's sort of in between the Z7 and the Z9. So there is, you've dropped the weight down quite a bit. So that combined with this 600mm primes, lightness and weight friendliness makes you've got a really good package. It's probably a good kilo or more lighter than a Z9 and the 600TC. And that'll make a big difference on a whole day's shoot where you're walking around all day carrying the camera in your hands. So I see its niche. It has a niche in the market that I'd very much admire. I like lightweight gear when you can get it, because especially if you're trekking all day, it makes a big deal of difference. However, I'm still a bit confused about the 6.3 aperture. That to me doesn't make any sense in their lineup of lenses. It just sort of is like a random selection there. Obviously, it has something to do with the weight factor. So to get the weight down, they've had to increase the f-stop, as it were, in order to make it engineeringly possible. I get that, but I think people would have preferred a little bit more weight, maybe an extra 10-15% more weight on it, still making it lighter than the zoom, but having it at 5.6. It's not even the F factor itself, whether it's 5.6 or 6.3. It's even a marketing thing and a psychological thing. When you see something down as 5.6 in contrast to the 6.3, you think you're getting an advantage. Now, you are getting an advantage. Literally, these numbers do make a difference to your image. You get a bit more brightness, a bit more shallow depth of field, etc. So I understand that there is a legitimate difference. But the biggest difference is in your psychology. You think you're getting better value for money. So that actually helps in selling and marketing the product and gives you a lot more confidence when you're out there shooting that you're actually going to get the best image possible you can. So it might be a mental trick to yourself, if you like, but it all helps, doesn't it? It makes you feel better about yourself. You've got a lot more confidence in your gear. Now, you might be saying, Mark, you're ranting on all about this lens like you've owned it or you know it. Well, let me just give you a few sample images of some of the cameras and lens combinations I've had that are very similar to this, just so you know that I've actually got some experience. So some years back, I had the 200 to 400 f4 zoom. Now, that was an amazing lens. It was really sharp, and at f4 it was super bright. But the only limitation I had for that, it was up to 400 mils. So you could use a teleconverter if you wanted to, but it just became a little bit cumbersome and heavy. It was a very heavy lens, but a very high quality lens. I'll show you some images and photos up on the screen where I was using it, and the photos of the lens itself. So that was a beautiful lens. I have a video back there, I think a couple of years ago, on my using it and highly recommending it. It was a quality product, and I was able to get that at a very good price over in Japan secondhand, as I usually do. So yeah, that was a good lens, and I liked that one. That was a great professional quality Nikon telephoto lens. The other lens that I've used in the similar context was actually my 70 to 200 with the addition of a 2x teleconverter. Now, the 70 to 200 is actually a 2.8 lens, but once you put the teleconverter on it, the 2x that is, you end up with a 5.6 lens. So that's 5.6 at 400 mils. And I'll show you again the images of that combination and some photo samples that I took from there. And I used that for several years. It was a great little combination, and particularly relevant was its weight. It was actually quite a lightweight combination for around 400 mils and at 5.6. So it was a very good unit. And versatile, because you could take the teleconverter off and use it as a portrait lens. So that was fantastic. But I wanted something longer reaching and more specific, and that's when I got my Sigma. So I got the Sigma 150mm f5 to 600mm 6.3. So when I talk about 600mm and 6.3 aperture, I know what I'm talking about because I currently own one. And of course, Nikon have released one of these zooms. It's 180 to 600, but it's pretty much the same package. And I've recently taken some video with this Sigma lens, and at 600 mils, it was actually pretty beautiful imagery. Now, I was having to carry around a big tripod with me, and we're talking about the weight factor and how that makes a difference. Let me just show you the tripod and the head I was using. It's here. It's a Vanguard. It's a Actus 323 AT. That is the tripod itself, and it's aluminium, and it's actually very heavy. It weighs about, I don't know, 3 kilos or something like that. And the head I'm using is actually a video head, and that's a Manfrotto 502. And that was a very excellent unit. It gives a beautiful fluid head movement and nice and smooth action. So if you have to pan it all in any way, it's actually a very great unit. So I was carrying around this thing with me, and this thing weighs a ton. Now you have that with you, and the heavy combination of a Z9 and the long zoom. It was a very, very weighty combination. In fact, I had to use a trolley bag and put things in there because it was just too heavy to carry around. So I really empathise from practical experience with the idea of having a lightweight lens and a lighter camera like a Z7 or a Z8, which would be very practical. So I get it. I've had to experience the weight of drudgery of carrying heavy things around, and so obviously that would be very welcome, that weight difference. Now, as a funny anecdote about that, I should share with you that with the zoom I have right here, I didn't have a specific filter for it. So I had to improvise because it's a 95mm filter thread and I had up to 86, but I had no 95s. So what I did in order to make that usable for me when I get out to 600mm, etc., was to mask tape with duct tape an old filter I had for my video format. And it was a 100mm square filter. So that filter there I was able to just tape on very carefully so as not to obstruct anything, and that provided me with a level of filtration where I could actually do some video even at 6.3, even at 4K at 120 at 250th shutter speed. I still had to have a filter because it was so bright. And this is something you must consider, and I really highly recommend it. Obviously, I'm going to take that filter off. That's not going to stay on the lens. It was just because I was doing specifically video, and video is very bright. With I'm doing photos, I just increase the shutter speed. I can go to 8 thousandths of a second if I want to, and make it as dark as I like. But when it comes to the video, you need filters, and that was an accessory I had to make do with at the time. Now, will I order a 95mm filter? Yes. But when I was going to do that wildlife videography that I've got a video for just last week, I didn't have the time to wait for one to come in the post. So I had to improvise, and that was a funny improvisation. But just on the subject of filters, and I'm not going to waffle on a lot about them today, but I just wanted to show you my collection of filters, that I do buy a lot of filters. I have many. And if you have a look at all these lenses that you see around me, they've all got filters already on them, including all these filters that I have before me. So obviously I'm going to have to buy one more filter, disappointingly, to work on these long zooms. But I just wanted to show you how seriously I take having the right filtration and having also enough varieties of them. So whether they be, 77s or 86 or 52, whatever filter size you happen to have, you also want to make sure you've got the various stops. So I have usually a circular polarizer of every size. I'll have a 4-stop, 8, and a 16-stop as minimum of any size that I use. So I have that versatility. Now, yes, I agree that gets very expensive, and this is where a circular ND filter can come in handy, because then you can just adjust the light and dark. I've done a video and expressed about these before. They are useful, but they do have limitations. So sometimes it's just nice to have the exact right filter for the day, and that's all you need to take with you. So I've got options, I believe in them, and I'm just proving it there that I've invested in many of them, and will be buying more, no doubt. So that's specifically mostly for video as an issue. A circular polarizer is probably all you need for your photos, just to get rid of some unnecessary glare off the water or sky. So getting back to this 600mm and the associated use of it, I can see it being very, very useful for those long treks, and also days where you're taking a lot of photos of wildlife at random, and you might be in either parks or forest or so on, and you just need to make sure that you've got something you can carry around comfortably. So that's pretty much enough of the 600. It'll be just a time of waiting and seeing how many people and professional Nikon shooters use it and like it and can deal with that 6.3 aperture. It's not tragic, but it's just, I was surprised. I really thought they should have just made it the 5.6 and done with that. And my feelings on this are very much the same with the new Nikon camera, the Nikon Zf. Now, is it a great camera? Yes, for its purpose and functionality and its retro styling, it has lots of great features and functions very well. But they made the excuse when in production that they said, oh, but we wanted it really a thin camera so it reflected the old world look, and therefore that's why they couldn't put in a CF Express card and they used these little SD cards. Well, I'm sorry, I'm not buying that, because what I feel is this. Had they have not mentioned that and just made the camera 2 or 3 mils or whatever it took thicker, no one would have known. You only know even that that's a thing because they made a fuss of it. It's almost like they're making an excuse for what they did rather than actually explaining it. So my feelings of that is, if you had the ZF and it was 3 or 4 millimeters thicker, would you notice? I don't think you would even pay any attention unless they'd mentioned anything about it. You would have been just happy that you had a CF Express card. And I think the politics at play there was they were getting a bit nervous about the, remember the Z6 and Z7 Model 1 when they first came out, and all they had was one XQD card reader, and then people would complain and say, oh, where's the backup? It's a real problem. And of course, no one ever has problems with CF Express or XQD cards. They're magnificently high quality and they barely ever fail. So it wasn't really a problem, but just in people's minds, they were thinking it was an issue. I think they forget very much about the old film days where you would have a roll of film in your camera, you had no idea what you'd taken because you couldn't view the images, and you were just hoping and praying that they came out. There was no backup at all then, was there? And people survived. So I think, people make too big a fuss about paranoia of things that might happen one day rather than just the actual user experience of the gear today. So in my experience, I will just relate that I take photos all the time. Every week I'm out there taking photos or video, and I've never had a card fail. In fact, I've never even had an SD card fail, but technically I hear that people say that they're more likely an issue to do so. But certainly my XQDs and my CF Express cards have never let me down. So I think the one XQD card in that camera, being able to fit that in would have been a much better arrangement from Nikon, and they should have just sucked up the criticism and said, look, it's a retro camera. Did you have 2 rolls of film in the camera in the old days? No. Well, you got one, really high quality card. Be happy with that. And I think that would have been a very reasonable explanation and justification, because you don't really need backup. And after all, very few pro shooters, and when I'm talking about pro shooters, I'm talking about here people doing, say, sports action, wildlife, weddings and so on, probably aren't going to use a ZF anyway. They're going to want something, with the dual cards, they're going to want something with high shutter speeds or, better video or 8K video or whatever they want, but they'll be going for top-end cameras like a Z8, for example. They wouldn't probably consider the ZF as anything other than a backup camera. And that's nothing wrong with that. That's fine. But at least give it a decent card. That's my opinion on that. And I don't think you're ever going to change my opinion. I've had a few people make comments, ranting over me, saying that I don't know what I'm talking about with SD cards, and they're really good and it's all awesome and the ZF's fantastic. Well, I'm not saying the ZF's a bad camera. I've never said that or suggested it. I've just spoken only about the preference and their choice of card use. And I think making the camera a little bit thicker without making a fuss of it and just putting the one CF Express card in would have been a much better choice, and that's my opinion. I'm sticking with it. So the other thing I'd like to talk to you about is a wonderful thing Nikon have done, and that is they've given our Z9s now a firmware upgrade, and we've got a now 4.1 firmware upgrade. Now, what does that entail to us? Well, it means you've got such things as specific autofocus features, and the specific one that most suits me and I'm happy about is the exact bird photography one. So it's actually now you can choose a bird rather than just an animal, and then when you go birding, of course, it's going to be more reliable and accurate in finding that creature. The other thing they give you is plane detect as well. Now, I don't shoot a lot of aeroplanes, but if I should go to an air show or see some planes around and want to take some pictures, it's just nice to know you have that option as well. So I'm certainly not complaining that it's there. So these are specific autofocus detection things are a great option. I think it's wonderful that they give us more and more specific choices, because let's face it, people do often specialise. Some people might be car photographers and that's all they take photos of. Some birds, I take a lot of bird photos. It's probably my majority of wildlife photos is birds. So I'm very excited about that. And if you're in the aviation industry and you're a pilot or you're going around a lot of aeroplane air shows because you're a fanatic, then that's going to be a great option for you too. So Nikon makes some fantastic decisions, and they do us some real blessings with choices and cameras. And the choices that they're giving us are only making our options much more better. So if you haven't got much of a budget, they give you a choice when your budget is low. And if you've got an unlimited budget, they give you some unlimitedly magnificent lenses and cameras to choose from. So that's great. They're catering for everyone, and I think that's fantastic. We're waiting on a few little things. We're waiting on a pro-level crop sensor camera, like a D500 replacement for a Z frame, so you could call it a Z500 or maybe it's a Z90, who knows what they'll call it, but a crop sensor version of, say, a Z8 would be fantastic. Something with high-end features but just the smaller, lighter form factor. So that's an exciting option in the future. Maybe next year we'll get something like that when they release the Z6 and Z7 III. Might be a package they put all together. They do seem to bundle things, don't they? And speaking of bundling things, for example, it's like when they brought the 400mm out. People were making jokes about Nikon and their obsession with 400mm because they brought out this 100 to 400, then a 400 prime, and then the 400 TC, and it seemed like they had a 400 obsession. This year they seem to have the 600 obsession, so you've got multiple 600mm lenses. Who knows what else they're going to come out with in that focal length, I don't know. But it might be interesting to keep a hold of and watching. I do find this, though, it's always better to be patient and sit back and wait with Nikon. They'll often release something that's quite excellent, but way out of your price range, and you don't really want to have to dead up for something you don't use too much. Often when you wait, they start releasing cheaper and cheaper alternatives and options, and you've actually wished that you'd just been a little patient because the next thing that come out was probably a lot better value for you. For me personally, when it comes to this 600mm range, I think you can't go past the 180 to 600mm. Because I think the versatility of that is incredible. See, I've spoken about having these zoom lenses before. I said I had the 200 to 400 f4 lens, which is a magnificent lens at f4. That was a versatile lens because it was 200 to 400. You had a range you could use. So if you're taking a photo of a creature, the creature starts moving towards you, well, you can just zoom back. You don't have to physically pick up and go. And you saw this giant tripod and head I had. If you're using that sort of thing for video, there's no way you're going to want to hurry up, pick that up, walk backwards, reset it up, rebalance it and calibrate it, and that's just too much hassle. When all you have to do is turn a little, zoom ring, and then you get the same result. So having versatility in a lens is really, really awesome and important. Don't underestimate that. Primes are great for sharpness and etc., but they're not very useful out in the field. Great in a studio, perhaps. So I found that I had that one there. I also had the 70 to 200 with the 2x teleconverter, which gave me like 140 to 400mm focal length range, up to 5.6. And that was actually a brilliant combination too. And as I said, that was a lightweight combo, and I really appreciated the lighter weight factor for that. So it was a little bit messy in that you had to have the teleconverter and so on, but ultimately it was still a great package and worked extremely well. So this is why I have, as I've shown you, a 150 to 600. I want to zoom. I'm sorry, I just do. I don't want a fixed prime for that sort of length of photography. It's just going to be too inconvenient for me to not be able to get back. And many times I've had creatures like storks, for example, herons, where what they do is they're wading in the water, which is beautiful to see, and they're catching little fish and creatures, and they're slowly coming closer and closer and closer to you. Now, it's a slow process. They're just wading and finding stuff through the water. But if they're coming closer and closer to you, you're in big trouble if you've got a prime. You're not going to be able to adjust your settings to get them into the frame. I mean, you don't want to be in a situation where you're taking a photo of one eyeball because they've got that close to you. And be honest with you, I've had these herons come up to me within 1.5 meters. Almost I could reach out and touch them, they were that close. 600mm, all you're getting is the side of their face. So really it's important to have a zoom for that flexibility. And when we can talk about aftermarket products that are quite interesting, I've seen that Viltrox have brought out an interesting lens. They brought out a 28mm f1.8. Now that's useful in that in the Nikon lineup they don't actually have a 28 1.8. So we have a 28 here that I have. This is a 28 2.8, and this is actually a really good lens. It's super lightweight, it's sharp, it's versatile, very, very affordable. It's a great little lens to have. I actually would prefer something like this for most occasions, but the idea, however, of having another third-party option that is affordable and cheap, for Australian money it's about $570, which I think is around $380 US. It's a very affordable lens to buy, this Viltrox 28 1.8, and if that was the focal length you use a lot, then I can only recommend that you get them. I've owned Viltrox lenses. I had the 13mm crop sensor lens, and that was a 1.4, and that was a great lens for putting on my cameras for doing video. Nice wide angle, and it was great on the Zf that I owned. So I know the Viltrox lenses work extremely well, and that's a niche lens for the Nikon lineup because they've got a 24 and they've got a 35 1.8, but they don't have the 28 1.8. So if that was important to you, there is an option that's very affordable, and it is a full frame lens, so that's very, very useful. For myself personally, I won't be getting it, and the reason is I have all these Sigma lenses here, and I have a 24 1.4, and I have a 28 a 35 1.4. So because I've got very wide aperture 1.4 lenses in between the 28, that is 24 and 35, the 28 doesn't appeal to me. If I got the 28, I'll use a little Nikon one, which is fantastic. And of course, I also have the zoom lens. I have the Nikon 24 to 70, which covers 28 millimeters, of course. So I've got enough choices that I won't be buying it myself, but that doesn't mean I don't recommend it for others who need that 20mm focal length and need it a bit brighter than 2.8. And I know there are uses for that, particularly indoor video and photo work. You need as much light as you can get in. So yeah, that's an interesting option we have, and I love to have third-party options. As you know, I'm a third-party guy. If I can get something cheap and affordable, whether it be Viltrox, Sigma, Tamron, whatever brand, I'm not going to say no to getting one and saving some money where possible. So there are some lenses that Nikon make that are just not replaceable with another brand, and a good example of that I think is something like the 70 to 200. If you wanted a 70 to 200, I would be buying the Nikon one and highly recommending that because it was so brilliantly sharp and efficient and fast in focusing. So yeah, Tamron make an equivalent, something, what is it, a 28 to 180 or something like that. That's not a bad lens. That's not a bad lens as well. I think was it a 70 to 180? That's right, 2.8. It's an equivalent in focal length, but it's nothing the same as the build quality and image quality you're going to get from the Nikon version. So that S lens is highly recommended. And as I say, you can always throw on a 2x teleconverter and have a beautiful long reach zoom lens for that. So that's a great option. So in conclusion, I'm just letting you know what's coming up in the future. Now I did, as I've mentioned, I did a video with some bird life around Forest Lake, and I put a video up on that, and that was one of my first animal videos that I've ever done. Now you may notice there is some issues with the video. I picked up on that myself. There are some times when I was desperate to check the context and image quality, and I would put my eye up to the viewfinder to see what was going on. I had to do that because it was too bright. I couldn't see the back of the screen well enough. It was too glary outside, so I had to actually look through the eyepiece, and when I did that, I bumped with my eye the camera, and it's had a little jiggle and a movement. So I apologise for that in the image, but at least I'm now aware what not to do. I've seen the fault of that, and I won't be doing that again. I'll make another arrangement. Maybe put a monitor up on top of the camera that I'm using right now, for example, to see what I'm doing. If I have a big 7-inch monitor, maybe I can see a lot better and it's a bit brighter. Yes, the other thing I would probably do differently next time is also have a lighter tripod and fluid head arrangement. So I'm going to work out something a bit lighter to carry around because that heavy one was just a bit too much for me. 4 hours I was doing video for that day, and carrying that around from spot to spot with all that weight was like crazy. So you need something pretty strong and sturdy to take the weight of the Z9 and the long zoom, but maybe it just didn't need to be as heavy as I had it, and I think that caused me some compromise in efficiency, just because getting tired and fed up. So friends, I just wanted to tell you a little bit about what's going on here in the scene. Just like to update you on the settings I use. So right now I'm shooting with the Z6. I have the Sigma 50mm 1.4 on at the moment, and I'm shooting it at 2.8. 2.8 because I was demonstrating some products and I want some depth in the image, so it's going to look really nice and you better see what I'm talking about. Secondly, it gives a little bit of a shallow depth of field at 50mm, and that's quite pleasing to the eye. You may notice that almost every video I do, it's this same setting, and the reason is this is my office. I have a computer set up, big screen, TV and so on, and I do my editing in here, and I just make some minor arrangements, and very quickly I can have this set up for a YouTube video. Now I pop in a screen. I have one of those flexi screens, shields for dressing and undressing. My wife uses it. I use that as like a bounce deflection for sound to help with the sound quality, and of course I turn my computer and fan and everything off so that there's no sound interference. I have an air conditioner running in through the house, so that's cooling the room down enough for me to be comfortable. You see right now it's about 35 degrees Celsius, or over 100 degrees Fahrenheit if you're from the States, because I'm living in Queensland. It's a subtropical area, so it gets very hot. It's sort of like Southern California, and right now we're approaching the summer, so it's getting very warm. You'll notice that I always wear the same or very similar dark blue collared shirt. So if I don't wear this one, I have a slightly lighter blue one, but it's always a darker bluish shirt. You might say, why do you wear this shirt? Well, one reason, it gives a good contrast with the white background that I have behind me. And secondly, it's also very important that it hides the microphone. So you see that I use one of these little lav mics, and with the dark buttons on the shirt and the dark color of the shirt, it sort of camouflages it and makes it a lot less obvious so it doesn't stand out and look annoying. See, I've seen people wear t-shirts doing video and they'll clip the microphone onto the side of the neck of their t-shirt, and it looks very scruffy and odd and looks very unprofessional in my opinion. So I'm just trying to tidy myself up a little bit and look a bit professional. So if you're always wondering, why does he always wear the same sort of clothes and the same setup? Well, it's just purely aesthetics. I think it just looks better. So anyway, thank you very much for that. I just wanted to give you a little heads up on what was going on with the setup at the time. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed that video, but what's coming up in the future is another Comic-Con convention where I'll do a little bit of video, but I think mostly I'm going to concentrate on photos this time. So I'll have plenty of photos there to share. I've already booked out. Every hour of the 2 days is consumed, so I know that I'll have plenty of images to share with you, and that's always a lot of fun because there's a lot of colour and costume and personality in those photos. So that's something to look forward to for next time, but in the meantime, look, I wish you happy shooting experiences and enjoy your week. Until I see you next time. Bye-bye.